Hello and welcome to South Africa on 99.94. I am Neil Manthorpe. My co-host is Longani Zama, but you all know that already. I'm delighted to say that your questions are beginning to come in thick and fast now, and plenty of questions and suggestions about the way forward for South African cricket after the demise of the first two Test matches against Australia. And thank you for those, and we will get to all of them. Many of them are replicas, as you can imagine, but I promise you we will get to all of them. But for now, I'm more interested in, Lungani, your views on all sorts of suggestions for South African domestic cricket going forward. At the moment, you know, as just in case anybody has forgotten or didn't know, we had six franchises, which were an amalgamation of the 15 provinces or 14 provinces. They were all separated back into their provinces. 7 in the second division, 8 in the top division, so they play only one round of matches, 7 first-class matches. And what I find peculiar is that people are using that as an excuse for the quality of batting that South Africa produced in Australia. Well, it's the system has only just been introduced. Players have played the top 5 batsmen have been playing for over 10 years. But what are your thoughts, and what's the feeling back home in South Africa about the way forward? Because, you know, with the way the new world is structured, with the SA20 at its centre and everything else built around it, the first class games appear to have been sort of dotted around on the periphery. And that's not going to sustain the current crop of good players, let alone, never mind, produce new ones.
It was a worry for me that the minute it was announced, because you sensed it was a watering down of a system that you build up. I mean, I played a rung or two below Supersport Series at the time that it was the Supersport Series, and it was 6 strong franchise teams. And I think it was the South African Airways 3-day challenge that was below that, which was deemed first class cricket, but it was tough. It was proper tough cricket. Like you would run into, I think there was a game we played EP, and there was Mfuneko Ngam playing for EP, and Monento Hayward would play for others, and Johan van der Wath played for Free State at some point. They were proper big guns. So, I think even Ashwell or Herschel played for Western Province B the one time. So you run into serious cricketers, and you know that they are at Supersport Series, and beyond that are SAA and then South Africa. It's a proper system, and it's elite. And when you water it down and you now make it, 2 divisions, you're trying to appease every single union. But in that process of watering it down and spreading, you're diluting a lot of the proper serious cricket. And it's a worry. I mean, you can't judge it now because it's only a couple of rounds in, but it's a worry because in doing that and spreading so much of it, there's no time for all these fixtures. You still got the T20, the domestic T21, I think it's the Africa Cup. Then you've got the domestic 50 over stuff. Then you somehow squeeze in a couple of rounds of red ball cricket. And then obviously SA20 now takes out 6 weeks of the season, and that's not moving. So where Supersport Series was the pinnacle of red ball cricket and was the priority of any cricketer, that's been flipped on its head. The priority is now SA20, and everything else is kind of conveniently shifted in there. And that's all well and good for the back pockets of players, but for the future of the Test game, you can see that it's just going to become less and less of a priority. It's almost in line with how much Test cricket is scheduled for South Africa over the next few years. It's almost as if the ICC looked at it and said, well, if you're only giving yourself a handful of first-class matches anyway, you probably only need 3 or 4 Test matches a year, which is scary because you're just going to slip further and further away. It's incredible to think that South Africa are even competing to for the World Test Championship because they just don't play enough red ball cricket, and it shows. There's no application in terms of batting, and in terms of bowling, there's one-day lengths and one-ball lines. Limited overs cricket line and lengths. There's no patience. Not to go back to that horror of the second test, but Cameron Green, the 2 wickets that he got to break the partnership of Marco Jansen and Calvarena, was bowling about fifth stump and just waiting, not trying to rip out middle stump or anything like that, or throat ball. It was just good old-fashioned first-class cricket where you bowl fifth or sixth stump, back of a length, and you trust the ball's going to nibble either way and ask questions of the batsman. And if you do it consistently enough, eventually you're going to nick off, or you're going to get an LB, or you're going to get something. You don't see a lot of that with the South African team. There's 3 or 4 lengths bowled in and over. There's an urgency to get people out. You don't out-patient people. And they are on the same can be said about the batting in terms of just lack of application. That goes back to not playing enough red balls and facing 400 balls to make 200 or 250 balls to make 100 and feeling really good about your technique and secure and knowing where your off stump is. A lot of these dismissals are bred by playing a lot of hit ball cricket where you can't afford to shoulder arms once. You've got to get going immediately, and it shows, sadly.
Okay, just to point out that the World Test Championship, I mean, I am of the opinion now, obviously I'm still just recovering from shock from the first 2 Test matches. I wasn't actually shocked by the first Test at the Gabba because it finished in 2 days, and I'd just seen the 2 previous Test matches finish in 2 days as well, also in defeat. I'm more shaken by the lack of competition shown on a good pitch at the MCG. Anyway, just to point out that South Africa could still qualify for the World Test Championship, and what an extraordinary thing that would be. It's like a one-legged man competing in a 100-metre race. If they avoid defeat or even win the SCG Test, which I can't see happening, and then beat the West Indies in 2 Test matches in their final World Test Championship assignment, they still could qualify for the World Test Championship, which would be an extraordinary thing. But I wanted to follow up on your point there, Sams, about the traditional selection criteria, the traditional route in which players have earned the right to be noticed by the national selectors, and learning by repetition, bowling 1,000 balls, 10,000 balls, facing 10,000 balls, scoring runs, go away to provincial cricket, do it for 2 or 3 years, take wickets, score runs, and it's a very traditional route. But it has to change. Those values no longer, they're not irrelevant, but they cannot apply in the way that they have used to. There has to be a change in mindset and philosophy and a fast-tracking element. I just wrote an article in which I imagined somebody like Tristan Stubbs, who didn't play in the first 2 rounds of the first-class competition. He wants to play Test cricket. He would love to. But he couldn't get into his provincial first 11. So he didn't play the first 2 rounds of first-class cricket. And I think that some lateral creative thinking needs to be applied here, change in philosophy. And for somebody like him, the national selector, Victor Mpitsang, who is a lovely man, but doesn't do very much selecting, in my humble opinion. He really doesn't do very much. He's not proactive. And in fact, he's a reluctant reactive. But if he said, for example, Tristan Stubbs sees the ball well, clearly, hits it even better, and he's keen to learn, and he's smart, let's fast track him. Let's abandon those old traditional conventions. Let's fast track him. Hey, Pakistan have been doing it for 30 years, fast tracking highly talented youngsters in. And whereas the likes of me have been saying, you can't learn Test cricket on the job, well, I'm changing my mind. So for Tristan Stubbs, so rather than learning about first class cricket and then slowly transforming that first class learning into test cricket, how about we just have a week's intensive learning session with Hashim Amla, Neil Mackenzie, Jacques, whoever. But, Hashim, and so he spends 4 hours batting in the middle. 4 hours, not 40 minutes in the nets. And he's imbued with that knowledge and that experience. And we take out that low, slow, glacial journey into Test cricket that you have slowly learned. So a change of structure to make more efficient the traditional methods, but also a change of philosophy because the world's changing. There isn't time anymore for those old routes.
Yeah, it's happening too slowly, and like you say, by the time Stubbs gets an opportunity to be picked, he's already been picked by 3 or 4 franchises around the world who are happy to pay him £250,000 each. So why would you wait for a precious first-class cap to play 3 days, 4 days of cricket? It happened to David Miller. He was desperate to play Test cricket, desperate. Genuinely desperate. And there was a criteria that said you have to average 40 and you have to do, this checklist, this precious checklist. England don't have a checklist. When they picked Ahmed as their leg spinner now, there was no checklist. When, we spoke about Warner and how he came into the test team, he's just finished 100 tests now. There was no checklist for him. There's a fast track for talent, which if your selectors are doing their job properly, they are watching. So your Jonathan Birds and your Devil Brevis and your Stubbs, people of actual potential, you tell them early, and unfortunately that's the way life works. You're talented, you're special, you stand out from the rest. You're not going to go in the same queue. You go to Oratambo, there's a queue for everyone else, and then there's a discovery queue on the side, which you still go on the same plane, but you just get there faster for a reason, because you're talented, and if we let you go there, there's a big risk that we run losing your talents to Dale Benkenstein's sons. Both now have gone to England, and one of them is showing serious signs of eventually playing for, I think Gloucestershire, I'm not sure, it might be Nottingham, but because the system was too long, he wasn't picked for SA Under-19 because there had to be a certain number of players that were picked, and they felt that he was too young, but he was the best player in terms of stats. But we won't pick you because you're 16 and there are other under-19s who deserve an SA Under-19 cap because they won't get another chance. So we won't pick you even though you're the best player. And he said, okay, well, I'll pack my bags and play county cricket where they pick me on talent and not protocol. If you don't fast-track the best players, there are too many options in world cricket now that players will take and are happy to not. They'll forego it. Why would you take a test cap and go and lose a series in 5 days over 2 test matches when you can go, you could have been playing in the Big Bash in the same country and earning like fuffers $200,000, $300,000, and then you're going to come back home and play in the SA20 and earn another packet and then go to the IPL and then go. That's Tristan Stubbs' path. He can do that. He doesn't need a test cap. South Africa, he wants one. But you want to ask him the same question at the end of this test series, and you want to ask him that same question again in 2 years' time, if nothing changes. Does the test cap still hold the same appeal it did when you were finishing off matric? Ask David Miller. There came a point where it didn't matter anymore. He gave 2 seasons of giving everything, playing everything for the Dolphins, doing his utmost to get noticed. And it was no. And then eventually he drew a line and said, okay, well, that's not going to happen. So my priorities now shift purely to white ball cricket. And his bank manager will tell you that it was the best decision he made. And if you look at it now, he's still playing, he's still at his peak. Would you rather have him coming in at 6 and playing his natural game, as so many other teams have started picking number 6 batsmen who are going to come and give you a jolt of energy in the middle of an innings at about 60 overs before the second new ball, or the plodders that are currently there who are scratching around and making 1 of 20 and then running themselves out? But that's what happens when you don't fast-track talent and say, you're too good not to be given a chance at all levels, at all formats. But you're going to wait your turn and wait your turn and wait your turn. Tristan Stubbs will wait for a while. Devil Brevis will wait for a while. Jonathan Bird will wait for a while. And then eventually, off they go. And he will make millions, and he'll make thousands of runs, and he'll look back on his career, and there'll be someone who's got 50 caps, and he'll have 50 million. You tell me who's happier.
Okay, let me think about that in the break, and we'll come back in just a moment.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Yeah, Zams, good point. And as always, touching very strongly on reality. There's no doubt whatsoever that players want to play for their countries. As you have said right from the very start of 99.94, you've always said, don't discount the dream that players have, certainly in South Africa, of representing their country. But at some point, sooner and sooner, they'll be faced with the prospect of the long, hard slog of earning a national cap or a test cap. And there will be a manager or an agent who will say, here's the route to your test cap, and here's the route to financial security for life before you're 30. It's a no-brainer. I mean, you'd be deluded to say no. The test cap means more to me than financial security. I mean, it's that's the reality, and so I just kept feeling during the course of the MCG Test match, the brief period that South Africa batted anyway, I just kept thinking if we had whoever they were. You've mentioned John O'Bird a few times, and there's Jordan Herman and young batsman Yanaman Malan. I mean, Malan. he was placed in a one-day box, in a white ball box, like from the very beginning of his international career. I don't understand it, but if they were there in their early to mid-20s and they experienced that Boxing Day atmosphere, the cauldron of the MCC, it was extraordinary. I'm so lucky to have done a few of them now, but as it was, we had a bunch of 30-somethings knowing full well that even if South Africa play a test match again there on Boxing Day, which is highly unlikely, they certainly weren't going to. So opportunity wasted.
Big opportunity wasted. On the back of the opportunity that was wasted at the T20 World Cup. So again, the succession planning, you've got to ask. You said now Yanamal Malan has been boxed as a white ball cricketer. By who?
I don't know. He's got a first class average of 48. So who did put him in that box?
And whoever did has either moved on in the system, and because if they haven't, and they're part of this current regime, if Victor Pitsang hasn't put him as a white ball cricketer, why is he not considering him for selection? His numbers are better. First class numbers are better than anyone else on tour. Anyone else. Why is he not in Australia when the one thing that South Africa lack are runs? It's a serious question. It's a serious question. If he averages 48 and the team can't even make 200, why would he not be in that team? Unless Victor simply come in and is also just buying the logic that, oh well, if he's been called by who came before me a white ball cricketer, then that's all he'll be under my regime. Then you're not really doing a job. You're just a placeholder. You're just doing what was done before, and it's just under a different name. the whole point of a change of selection policy and a change of structure and a change of personnel is to change things, not to keep doing them the same. It's to change. You change your captain because you say, Dean Elgar's not working, so we will go with Aiden Markram, or we will go with Kagiso Rabada because we want a new direction and we want a new energy. That's the point. But if they're going to go to press conferences and do exactly what Dean Elgar's done and speak the same language, and then what is the point? It's not to replicate. It's to change. It's to dynamically change the way. Bazball is a whole phrase because they looked at it and said, the system is not working. Our test team is not performing to the levels that our white ball teams have that's change. That's actual measurable change. And even if you stuff up once like they did against South Africa at Lords, you go, nope, we are sticking to it and we're going to win Old Trafford and we're going to win the Oval and we're going to win the series and we're going to go and do the same thing in Pakistan again and we're going to go to the Ashes and we're going to commit. That's change. South African cricket has not changed.
Okay, so I've deliberately steered away from using the term Bazball, and I've tried very hard in the last two podcasts not to use England as an example, because I think everybody else is doing that. And you know what? They set a bloody brilliant example. They've won 9 out of 10 test matches, having won 1 out of 17 before Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes took over. There are many aspects that are admirable. There are many that are impractical for other teams to try and emulate. But one, I think, to me, fundamentally, at the core of their change in approach is the demystification of Test cricket. And Mickey Arthur, I think, enhanced the mystification of Test cricket when he became coach. And I say that because, Mickey and I are very good friends. We go back a long, long way. But he always said, Test cricket is the pinnacle. And he used the word, it's like going to a cathedral. You don't go in jeans and t-shirt. It was the whole. And what Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum have said is bollocks to that. Rubbish. Let's just demystify. Let's just treat it as an form of entertainment. Let's get on the stage and entertain people and do everything we can to win, which is fabulous. Anyway, I'm losing the point here. Never matter. Never mind. Just a quick comment on that.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, you say, Mickey said you can't wear jeans to a cathedral. I promise you, the cathedral that Ben Stokes and co are currently playing it now, they've got rock and roll going, but the whole congregation is rocking and they love it. So you change with the times. I get Mickey's point, but that's then boxing your audience and saying they will only accept you scoring 2 runs and over and and bowling 20 overs for 30, and that's good cricket, not 5 for 20 in 7 overs and scoring at 5 and over. Cricket's cricket. It's entertaining. If the game is moving forward, you still play the same shots. You still play a cover drive. It's just you're playing 3 cover drives instead of 1 every 12 balls. You still have to apply the same techniques. It's just more aggressive, not reckless. It's more aggressive. There's an urgency, and I'd certainly watch that urgency over plodding along and trying to survive and not surviving, which is what our audiences have had to watch, unfortunately, for most of this year.
Okay, we'll take a short break and come back with one more short whammy section.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
Right, Sam, just a final thought on the reaction from South African fans and supporters back home, and I guess around the world. You can never be sure on social media whether people are at home or not. But I do think we should touch on the cheap shots aimed at a very soft target. People saying that quotas are partly to blame for South Africa's current demise. And I always go back to that great lesson that I learnt when Dale Steyn and A.B. de Villiers were selected at the same time into the test team as 21 and 22. I think they might have been both 21. Sorry, but and they'd played 11 and 13 first-class games respectively. So they were thrown into the deep end. And a dear friend of mine said to me, I was saying how progressive and forward-thinking that selection was, and a dear friend of mine said to me, "What would you have said if they were black?" and that stuck with me for ever since. And it pains me really, to see the number of people are saying that calling Themba Bavuma and Kaya Zondo quota players without bothering to do the research and to look at the numbers. And you know what? And there are plenty of cheap shots to be had. And Kaya Zondo's got a first-class batting average of just over 30. But that doesn't matter, does it? Because it's the last 2 years. They have been selected. Well, Themba is continually selected because he scores important runs. He doesn't go on as much as he should. He's the first to acknowledge that. But, he's 20 50s and 53 test matches, not great. My point is, who's better? Now, there are some youngsters, definitely, and we've mentioned them now, but for the majority of his career, who was better? Who was he keeping out of the team? So I'm just putting all the heat on you and asking you to, as I've written many times, don't take a cheap shot at a soft target and blame transformation for South Africa's current demise, because it's not like that, because Kaya Zondo and Themba Bavuma are in the squad on recent form merit.
Yeah, well, that's, if you're not going to give a solution and you're just going to complain for the hell of it, it's not even a discussion worth having. Who would you rather have? Currently, who would you rather have that's on the squad? Because unfortunately, that's the squad that was chosen. So it's not as if the options that we've discussed are even options for the third test. The only thing that you can change really is put a spinner in for a pace bowler. So these are, mood conversations to justify the frustration. These guys don't pick themselves, and they never have. Their numbers, like you said, the numbers that they've put up for a couple of years have justified, because they've gone with the glacial system that we've spoken about, that eventually it's your turn. Well, it's their turn. It's their turn. If that's your picking criteria, it's their turn. If you did it differently and you say the standout SA under-19 player every year is going to be given a chance, different story. But you're right about Dale and AB. And AB has said often that he felt uncomfortable for a long time. And the only thing that kept him sane was being surrounded by superstars who showed him the standards. And when he failed and played a shot not dissimilar to Theunis de Bruyn's shot in the first day, he was told in no uncertain terms, you will not play this game for a long time if that's how you're going to approach it. If you don't put a bigger premium on your talent, you're just going to disappear by the wayside. And he had a few of those, and he knows it. Biggest issue with South African cricket at the moment, whether you want to call them quotas or transformation or whatever, the biggest problem is the lack of accountability. The tough conversations that AB and Dale would have had as 21-year-olds learning are not being had now. They're not being had. And that's why nothing changes. That's why you don't score 200 in 8 innings. Because the tough conversations are just not being had. whether that's because no one is willing to have them or no one is capable of having them. You gotta put people in there, with reputations in sport. Alex Ferguson had a hairdryer treatment reputation, but look at the teams he produced and won, because you know that he cares, and you know that if you don't meet his standards, you're not going to last. The same applies for Jose Mourinho. The same, we've watched Rassi. I've worked on documentaries with Rassi Erasmus where he tells you in no uncertain terms, if you don't meet your criteria as a rugby player, I don't care how talented or popular you are on social media, you're not going to play for me. There's got to be a line in terms of hard work and perseverance and the things that you put in that then transfer onto the field. And if you're not holding players accountable to those standards and you're just letting them be their own bosses, this is what happens. It's worrying. It's really, really worrying. People are more excited to, like I said in previous podcasts, people are now more concerned about watching football and rugby than watching what should be the height of summer, your test team in Australia. If the alarm bells are not ringing at CSA now, then I'm not sure when they ever will, but they have to be. SA20 might save the financial life of cricket South Africa, but the soul of it is playing and playing at the pinnacle. If you're no longer part of the pinnacle conversation, which you're slipping away from further and further, there won't be much of a game to protect, because if as we honest as we have been, the SA20 is an Indian league hosted in South Africa. It's not South Africa's league. It's not South Africa's money. It's not South Africa's IP. So at some point, you got to look at it frankly and say, what is actually being produced by South Africa cricket-wise at the moment? It's not a good look.
No, it's not a good look. Jeepers, that's a very quotable finish from you there. I'll remember that. And so I can't see any change at the SCG. We'll talk about it. We'll dissect it afterwards. But I think Heinrich Klaassen would be a better bet than Tienes de Bruin, who looked hopeless. Simon Harmer, come in. Sydney hasn't spun as much as it has done historically in recent years, but it is still a two-spinner venue, and Ashton Agar's been brought in by Australia. Apart from Carl Verreynne and Marco Jansen, both of whom have shown some fighting spirit with the bat, it's just so hard to see a change. And I think we just have to kind of bite the bullet, endure it, suffer the inevitable consequence at the SCG, and then come back and really start the regrouping process and rebuild with purpose and determination rather than anger and recrimination.
Well, the key to starting that process is identifying somebody who is actually going to roll up their sleeves and do the work, not go through the motions. That's the reality. Go back to the T20 World Cup, do that review and be honest, hold people accountable, and then do the same for this tour. Then you start winning the hopes and trust of the public. You would hope that the one resolution that Cricket South Africa has for 2023 is to be truly accountable with itself, and look at this squarely in the eyes, because it is a game in crisis. The national product is in crisis, and it's slipping down the list of priorities for the South African public day by day. And it's not just on the back of the results in Australia. It is a grim time to be following South African cricket at the moment, and you need to change that. Before the players change it, the people who govern them and pick them need to hold themselves to higher standards, because if you don't, people just stop caring, and your players start looking elsewhere for people who do care, or at the very least just improve their bottom line if things are not changing in South African cricket. So that would be the urgent hope, that in 2023 there's going to be a lot more accountability and a lot more honesty and coming out and fronting up. We asked Dean Elgar and coaches and people to front up after tough days. At the end of such a grim year for South African cricket, there should have been a press conference or something that addresses these things frankly and comes with remedies or plans to how the game will be changed dynamically and urgently. Not SA20, that is not a South African solution. That is an Indian plaything hosted on South African soil. It is not a South African solution. If you ask any of the people in actual power, there's not 1 cent of South African money in there. They just happen to love the country, and a lot of them happen to respect Graham Smith, and a lot of them happen to enjoy the talents and want to work with legends who are coaching different roles. But I promise you, it's not a South African product. It's an Indian product on South African soil. So you cannot look at that and say, oh, but we've got this as a success. It's not yours. You've got to start building your own successes, and you've got to start building new roads to success for the next generation of talents. Otherwise, they're going to be playing for other countries, or they're going to be playing in franchises around the world, and your product is going to keep on diminishing.
And on that note, Sams, I will enjoy the new year in the pleasant surrounds of Sydney. I'll have a run over the bridge for you. I will have a glass of whatever I can afford at the Opera House. I will raise a toast to you and our listeners and our readers, our listeners and our viewers. And I hope for a prosperous new year. And I'm going to look for some cheap fancy dress costumes just so that I fit in to the crowd at the SA20 when I get back.
Just borrow something from Bharat Sundarasan. He's been dressing as if he is an entire festival itself. So just get something from him and you'll be fine.
That's exactly what I'll do. And I'll see you at... we'll review the Sydney Test match, of course, before I embark on my journey home. So thank you very much indeed for watching and listening to everybody. I'm Neil Manthorpe. You can follow me at Neil Manthorpe on Twitter, and Lungani Sama at Wamzam17 on Twitter. So do please rate, review and subscribe, and we look forward to your company on the next episode.